Hello, friends. You are listening to the Maitri podcast Between Friends Conversations with Maitri. I'm your host, Nandini Ray, with my production team member, Damantivana, welcoming you all. I'm so excited to announce that today we have Nyna Caputi with us. Nyna is a filmmaker, blogger, advocate, and speaker on gender violence, misogyny, startups, leadership, diversity, and expert life. She started her career in India as a biotechnologist, and currently she is the founder and CEO of the Expat Woman and co-founder and producer at Bill Air Films. Nana is also an award-winning documentary filmmaker, and her last documentary, Petals in the Dust, focused on gender violence in India. It has been screened globally, including at the United Nations Film Festival. She also founded the Global Walk for India's Missing Girls in 2010 in San Francisco, an international awareness campaign on the violence and genocide of India that has taken place in over 25 cities and 5 countries, including India, Kuwait, Canada, USA, and Australia. Nyna has received many prestigious awards: the Women of the Year 2015, Women of Distinction 2015, the Global Influencer 2019, and many more awards and recognitions. Welcome, Nyna. Welcome to our show. Thank you for giving us your valuable time.
Thank you so much, Nandani. I so appreciate being on the show, especially since I really value what Maitri does. And Maitri has been involved in my journey as a filmmaker. And I'm actually also wearing this beautiful outfit, which I bought at the Maitri boutique on their first anniversary, where I was invited as a special guest to speak. So this is totally an honor.
Yes, I remember that, Naina, and we really value your support, and we are honored that you are on our show. So let's start our conversation with your last documentary, Petals in the Dust. So, what made you come up with the idea of making a documentary on India's missing girl? That's a very sensitive issue.
It is a very sensitive issue. Thank you for bringing that up because actually my film has not screened in India yet because it's so sensitive, and I don't want to really right now create any anger in that country because I think this topic for a lot of people hits very close to home. Anyway, to backtrack, I grew up in India, but I was really lucky and blessed because my father was a huge proponent of equal rights for girls. It's not like he was an advocate. It's not like he went on the streets marching for equal rights, but he wanted to have 4 daughters. He didn't have any sisters. And from the time, as soon, he married my mom, he's like, I hope I have 4 daughters. I think girls are so valuable. I was born after 5 years, and then my brother was born after another 5 years. And they weren't able to have any more kids, and so he just landed up with one daughter and one son. And my brother would always say, I think dad prefers you to me. He's always talking about 4 daughters. So anyway, so I made up for all the 4 daughters that he couldn't have. And he encouraged both my brother. We were treated equally, and my mom too. She didn't discriminate against me, for being a girl. And my dad, from a young age, he wanted me to be an engineer or a doctor. It wasn't like you're a girl, study something that just prepares you for marriage. So he was like, and he would teach me finances and stuff. So I grew up feeling very empowered and not realizing that, and this was in India, that there was all this discrimination happening against girls and women, that there was gender violence. I grew up in this bubble, and I was also kind of a spacey kid and teenager. So I never really paid attention. It's only after I moved to the US and my husband and I were visiting India. My mom used to do a lot of social work while I was growing up. She would visit orphanages. I remember when I just started working, there was this orphanage for blind kids that I used to volunteer at, and I used to bring one of the little boys there. His name was Basu. He was blind, but I used to bring him home at the weekends, for Sunday lunch, just kind of, be like a mentor and I'd say in a way foster mom for him. So I was always very passionate about giving back and especially helping children. And when I married, I was like, I told my husband it's really important for us to give back and to support kids who don't have parents or who are so that was my focus, more on children than on women and women's rights. So when we were in India, we visited this orphanage, and the supervisor there told us that before the orphanage was built, they used to drown baby girls in the lake nearby. And she said, so that's why they built the orphanage, so that they could give the people, it was in a village on the outskirts of Bangalore, so they could give people, provide people with a safe place, or
Mm.
parents with a safe place to drop off their daughters. And so I said, oh, there must be lots of girls in the orphanage. And she said, actually, there are not that many girls, because most of the girls are being either, even though abortion is illegal in India, there's a lot of under the table bribes being paid to doctors so they can do, abortion secretly when people find out they're pregnant with girls. Or
Mm.
those who can't afford would drown their baby girls or leave them in bushes or leave them. When I heard that, my husband and I were filmmakers, I said, my goodness, I didn't even know that 15 million girls have been eliminated in India in the last century. And this, as an Indian woman, even though I live in the US, I want to use your and my skills as filmmakers to be the voice for these missing girls, right? Because that's
Mm.
what they call them, the missing girls, because 50 million are missing because they were eliminated. They were either eliminated before they were born or after they were born. My husband's not Indian, he's
Mm.
American, he's grown up in the US, but he was so affected by it as well. He said yes to me. I mean, he didn't know what he was getting into because it took us 7 years to make that film. But he said, yes, let's make that documentary film. So that's my story. And that's, the more I researched when we came back to the US, the more I felt I had to tell the story and I had to be the voice for girls and women.
Actually, violence against women and girls remains one of the most pervasive human rights violation despite advances in women's rights around the world. So
Right,
we need to address this issue over and over and in different ways. Probably,
right,
as you did through documentaries, blogs, panel discussions, and we should also discuss this topic at our social discussion at our dinner table. It's such a big community issue and we always ignore and we always brush this issue under the rugs. And uh,
right.
thanks to you, kudos to you, Naina. You are doing a lot to raise awareness. You did everything, making documentaries, on your blog, writing blogs, panel discussion. And I hope many people are out there who are listening our show today, and they will be also doing their part in raising awareness. It is not easy to make a documentary on this very sensitive issue, as you said that you didn't even show that movie in India.
Right,
Uh,
right. Yeah,
yeah, so I'm glad that you made that effort at least to make that documentary, and I'm sure one day we'll be able to show that documentary in all over the world, especially in
right,
India where you made that movie.
right,
So by the way, Petals in the Dust is a beautiful name. Is there any
right.
story behind selecting this name?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is actually. So when we decided on this film, I was thinking about what name can I give, and I didn't want to just say, I didn't want it to be too graphic, the
Hmm,
name. So because in India we all our celebrations always have flowers, right?
of course.
Yeah. So my husband who's not Indian would always say Indian. I think Indian girls are the most beautiful in the world. He says, even on the streets, even when you see some of them who are really unfortunately, homeless, they still their faces have so much beauty. And he was like, so I was thinking of that, yes, Indian women are really beautiful, and always would break my heart when I heard someone, kill their daughter, because I'm like, how can you kill? It's like crushing a rose, crushing the life out, like ripping the petals out of a flower, and that's where
Hmm.
the topic came to me, like petals in the dust, because these flowers are just being scattered in the dust, they're being crushed, and that's the story behind the name. And I also wanted to add, I started off focusing on the 50 million girls that were eliminated. But then, as I started interviewing women, I realized that it didn't just stop when they were born or before they were born. The violence against girls and women continued, at every stage in their life. There was child abuse, there was rape, there was dowry, there was domestic violence. And the thing that happened while I was doing the documentary was the Delhi rape. Like two
Hmm.
weeks after I left India, and I had this really bad feeling because I'd interviewed all these women who were telling me different stories, not just about losing their daughters, but also how unsafe they felt. They were, facing a lot of domestic violence. Someone was almost set on fire by her husband, and there's all this pain. I was carrying all this pain with me, and then I came back to the US, and then the next thing I read is a Delhi rape, and I was like, oh my goodness, this was like a pot that was going to boil, and then it did. But it was horrific, but at the same time it brought this whole discussion of violence against women to the forefront. It was, yeah, so it kind of happened around the time I was making Petals in the Dust. And the other thing that happened was I realized that gender, and that's how I got in touch with Maitri. I realized that violence against women doesn't just happen. And because I'm Indian, I was focusing on the Indian community, right? So I realized it doesn't just happen in India; it happens across the world. And so I also included the U.S. and Canada in my documentary film. So I went, in the U.S. Of course, I interviewed Sonia Pelia, the president of the board of directors of Maitri, to share her work and the work that Maitri does, and to highlight that it's not just in India, just not among the less unfortunate or among the poor in India, but it also happens among the highly educated professionals in cities like Silicon Valley, right, where girls and women are discriminated. And then I went to Toronto, and I also went to British Columbia, and that's where I also interviewed women and, nonprofit advocates for, especially for South Asian women. And so my film covers 3 countries.
And yeah, you are right. Actually, system of patriarchy in which men dominate, oppress, and exploit women has been observed in most societies. It's not that it is only happening in India or Pakistan or Bangladesh, in South Asian countries. It's or in Asia. It's happening all over the world. You're absolutely right. At Maitri, we are seeing that we are here in Silicon Valley, in the Bay Area, and it is people generally think and hear everybody is, educated and successful, but there is no connection between gender oppression and success or education and socioeconomic background. It is happening in all communities, in all cultures, in all strata of our society and community, and it's just patriarchy. That's the main thing. Main thing is power and control. But since your research is mostly based on India and your film is mostly talking to Indian women, and you said that it took 7 years to make that documentary, it's a long time. So while making this documentary, did you face any threat or hostility from patriarchal Indian community?
Great question. So I did. Initially, I wouldn't say hostility, but even my family initially was very uncomfortable about it. And some of my, some of the family friends, and then of course there were people I didn't really know, and even Indians in the US. And I noticed it came more from the men, not the women so much in the US. From the Indians, it was like, oh, now you live in the US, so now you think you can start pointing fingers at India. And I was like, it has nothing to do with that. In fact, I'm still an Indian citizen. I held on to my Indian passport, and I was like, I still feel, I as an Indian, I owe a responsibility to my country to be a voice for the girls and women. It has nothing. I'm very patriotic. I just wouldn't just highlight something happening in India just to, give it a bad name. It's come to a point where it's a human rights issue, and it doesn't matter which country, because if we keep saying, oh, we don't want to expose or highlight this because, oh, it'll make India look so bad. No, I mean, when girls and women's lives are in danger, we have to speak up for them, and we have to advocate. It is no longer just like with all that's happening with the farmers in India, right? I know that the Bay Area was amazing, and they did a protest march on Golden Gate Bridge. We can't shut up. We can't be quiet about these things. We have to, as citizens of the world, and especially if we are aligned with that country, we have to stand up. So I did face some hostility, but then many people who watched the film realized that I was very sensitive in the film. It wasn't just, I was trying to tell the story and trying to talk about what the solutions were. It wasn't like, oh, look at this India, look how bad we are, look, we're killing daughters. I was very sensitive about the topic. And yes, I didn't do it about China, because people say, oh, why don't you do about a film about China? Because there they have the one-child policy, they're killing girls. I don't understand China's, politics. And there are enough films about China and its one-child policy. There were very few about India, but there were also Indian men in India and in the US who were amazing. My biggest sponsor of my documentary, because I had to raise funds, was an Indian man in the US. His name is Mohammed, and he heard about my film at a fundraiser. He has one daughter, and his one daughter adopted a girl from India, And this film really spoke to him. And he wrote to me. He didn't even know who I was. And he helped me. He helped fund the film so I could complete it. And that just shows you. So I also had a lot of amazing Indian men as advocates who went above and beyond. A lot of the fundraisers that happen in the Bay Area were actually hosted by Indian men who felt strongly about it. So I faced hostility on one side from both men and women, and then but I also got a lot of support, and then I got a lot of support from Americans who were just felt like this was an issue that they wanted to support, and it wasn't because, oh, poor India. They just felt this is a human rights issue, and we want to support your documentary so you can make it and be a voice for all those girls and women. And and when I used to speak, you do a lot of media at that time, and I would say, even though my film is about Indian girls and women, this gender violence, gender discrimination, patriarchy happens across the globe, and you resonate with anyone when you watch this film. Domestic violence among in the US is one of the highest, right, in the world. And not just in the Indian community, but all the communities. It's very high. And so people who are not Indian, when they watch the film, would come to me and say, this film really spoke to me because this happened to me, or this happened in my family, or I know a friend that happened. So there was hostility, but there was also a lot of support. I just want to say that.
Yeah. So when I'm hearing your story, I was thinking about myself that sometimes people ask me that how do you do this work? It's so very, very serious, and sometimes it's sad, frustrating. How do you keep doing that?
Right.
And I tell them that yes, it is sad, frustrating that it is 2021 and we are still seeing that lot of oppression, gender oppression, gender abuse, gender violence. But at the same times, we are seeing that a lot of people are so much helpful. They are raising awareness, and community is evolving. They are changing. They are most people, they are now talking about that how can we help, how can we stop gender based violence and gender abuse, and that's a big hope for us, and men
Right.
and women both. And once upon a time, there many men, they were not very comfortable, but we are seeing that last couple of years we are also seeing that many men, they are coming to Maitri and they are asking us that how can I help, how it's a great job you are doing. And also when we see that our clients are empowered, they are coming out of their trauma, their horrific situation, and they are standing up on their own feet, and they are feeling empowered, they're feeling happy and productive. That kind of message give us lots of hope and strength to move on in our journey. So I completely hear you what you are saying. When you are making this film, when I was watching your documentary, I was thinking that how did you convince women to talk about their misery and abuse on a public platform? It's very, very difficult, right?
Private, right? It's a very private issue. Yes, it was difficult, but I think the women, and many women, didn't want to be on camera, and I totally understand because, first of all, especially in India, where we don't really talk about what happens in our lives, personal lives, on camera. Like here, you have all these shows, right? Dr. Phil, and even on Oprah, where people would come forward and share everything that's happened in their life. As
Yeah.
Indians, we keep. They say whatever happens in the family stays in the family. You don't talk, and that's why so much abuse happens, because people don't come forward. I'm sure you see that even with Maitri, right? Like it must take women like several years of abuse and violence before they finally have the courage to come forward and talk about it and ask for your help. But I think the women who did come forward, and I had women who would tell me, I'm doing this because I want to be a voice for the women that don't have the courage to come forward and speak about it. So I don't know if you heard about Dr. Mithu Kurana. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
she died. Yeah, she died last year, which is really tragic. She was very young, but even before she was in my film, I saw her. She was in so many different films. She had been tricked into having ultrasound scan, because in India it's illegal to do ultrasound scans because people find out the gender and then do an illegal sex-selective abortion. But she was tricked into doing it. They found out she had twin daughters, and then they started pressuring her to abort those girls, but she didn't. She left her husband, gave birth to those girls, then became an advocate fighting for making this a criminal offense. So she was already being, and it was really draining for her. She was exhausted and she was so frustrated and sad because she wasn't getting any support and the courts were just ignoring her. But she still wanted to be on film, and she didn't give up, because she said, if I'm not a voice, if I don't come forward, no other women or girls will come forward. And she was an educated woman. She was a doctor herself. But I even had women who were from much smaller towns in India, or women who had not gone beyond, the first or second grade, who would come forward and speak because they just felt this was a platform for them to share their stories. And I was so impressed by the courage and generosity of these women to come forward, and speak about it, because it's not easy, and they knew that this film would be viewed publicly. And same thing in the US and in Canada. I had women come forward and share their stories as well. So more power to them. But I think it was just a very courageous act on their part to be the voice and
Yes.
promote the cause.
Yeah. And I personally believe that their stories give hope and courage to many survivors out there who are oppressed, who are thinking that should I talk about it? Should I reach out for any help? And when they're seeing that women like them, they are protesting their abusers or their abuse and doing something about it, they also get some courage to break the shackle of abuse. So kudos to them who spoke about their own oppression, own vulnerability, own pain on a public forum.
Right.
And you know what? Mithu's story also gives us another perspective that many people think that, oh, domestic violence, violence against women, family violence, this is happening in poor class and
Right.
uneducated class. They don't have college education. That's why they're doing this. But that's a myth. It is happening
Right.
in every community, in every section, no matter whatever their socio-economic or educational background. She was a doctor and she was married to an educated guy, but still she had to go through so much pain, agony, and abuse in her life. People need to understand that it is happening in all socioeconomic background and
Right.
you have
Absolutely.
to do something. Actually, I was thinking when you interviewed women from rural area, from metropolitan area, and in India, and from different socioeconomic background. So, what kind of similarity you saw or you witnessed amongst these women?
Great question. Very great question. So I would say the similarity was really the men they were married to or their fathers. And as you said, it doesn't, education and wealth don't matter. And what's among those who are not educated, and now first I'm going to talk about the ones who, force their wives to either do a sex selective abortion, or, or to get rid of their daughters. There were women who are married to men who are not educated, and where they blame the wives for the gender of their baby. And in
Hmm.
those cases, I understand because they don't really know the science. But in cases like Mithu and other women who are educated, and where their husbands blame them for, first of all, I don't see why they have to blame them for daughters. I mean, their mothers gave birth to them, right? Who are once upon a time daughters. I don't understand this. And most of these guys are like mama's boys, right? So I really don't understand their hatred for women. But they know that men, the sperm is the one that determines the sex of the child, right? So when you're having a daughter, it's a man's sperm that is deciding whether you have, which brings in the chromosomes that create the daughter. So how can they even blame their wife? And they would beat their wives up. They would do all this and say it's your fault. And the sad thing was the in-laws. So another thing I found similarity was, one is the rigidity and the narrow-mindedness of the men, and the
Hmm.
second was the in-laws, in many cases playing a huge role in supporting the husbands and turning a blind eye, a deaf ear to what was happening to their daughters-in-law. So I saw that most cases, and obviously in all the cases I interviewed, were very strong women because they had the courage to speak, right? But their strength actually seemed to anger the men more. Instead of saying, wow, I've married like a empowered, strong woman, they wanted to beat the strength out of the wife. It was really being married to men, or having fathers or mothers or in-laws that were very narrow in their thinking, and who thought that girls and women were inferior to men. Even when it was shocking when the mothers and mothers-in-law think that way when they themselves are women. But that's what I noticed.
It's very sad that all over the world we are seeing the same thing that I don't know when it's gonna end, but at least many of us are doing our best to raise awareness to talk about this issue. But I think it's long way to go. We have to
Right.
try our best, but that's not gonna change overnight. if all the stories, all the women you interviewed, all of them went through hell in their life, and all the stories are very sad. But
Right.
if I ask you to pick one or two which the most sad or sad story or that made you very angry and frustrated, would you be able to pick one or two from these all the
They were
stories?
all really sad, but I guess Dr. Mithu Kuranas for me was the one because she struggled for so many even before she passed away, right? Her story really bothered me because she went above and beyond trying to get support, trying to get justice. She was always writing to whoever was president and prime minister at that time. She was, I started the Walk for India's Missing Girls. She helped organize it in Delhi. She got some very high level people to join it. She was in every documentary that was made about this, that on every film. And I met her. I went to her house. Her parents are amazing. Her dad is also a doctor, the sweetest man. The mom is so, they took very often when this happens, the parents won't take the daughter back, especially in India, right? Because they'll say, oh,
Hmm.
you're creating like I can't get the Hindi word right now.
Stigma,
Yeah,
and
that's Hindi word, right? What's a Hindi word for that? Where you're bringing like shame on the family? I forgot. Anyway, so that they used to use her word,
mm,
but anyway, so they, but her parents took her back. They took her twin daughters in, and they supported her. And it was I could see the sadness in their eyes, like The other thing that really, inspired me about Mithu, she did not give her husband a divorce because she said the minute I divorce him, he's going to
mm,
marry another woman and he's going to ask for a big fat dowry, and then he's going to do the same thing to her, like force her to have sons. So and it was he was always trying to sue her. And the other sad thing about Mithu was then the court gave her husband custody of joint custody of the daughters. So after him saying I don't want those girls, he wanted her to abort them. The court actually gives him the girls as they get older because they were really cute, smart, sweet girls, and so then she had to share custody with them and every other. So that was a story that really like it was like, wow, this is talk about injustice and talk about
mm.
injustice from people in power who are supposed to be advocates for women and girls and human rights, and here they are empowering a man who has done nothing but bring pain and grief to his wife and his daughters. And then the other story that hit me was this woman from Maharashtra. She was buried as a child, her father buried her as a daughter. After her mom passed away, the grandparents or the father, he needs to take care of this little baby girl, and the father took the girl and then he went and buried her alive.
Oh
And
God.
that was I mean, she was crying when she was telling me the story, and she was older. She must have been early 60s maybe when I interviewed her. She was crying telling me the story, and luckily the grandfather figured something was wrong and he followed the father. And then as he was walking down the path, he saw this little hand sticking out from this mound of earth, and he dug it up and brought and saw it was his granddaughter. And he brought her home, and he and his wife took care of her. But because it was a village and people were not very educated, they said, oh, you brought this girl that the father didn't want back home, so the village shunned him and they had to move to another village. And then when she was older again, the father tried to kill her, and that pain really stayed with her. And that story was like, oh my goodness, she lost her mother, and then the father tries to kill her. And today she's like an advocate for women, for girls, for women's rights. She's married an amazing man. He's very supportive of her, and she has two sons. And she also wrote a book about her story, and I believe they made a film as well in Marathi about the story of her. So those are the two stories. I mean, they were all sad, but these were the two, like, wow.
Yeah, and it's so heartbreaking. I mean, when an infant maybe cannot move their hands or legs, they're so vulnerable, they're so
Right.
weak, and they're just babies. And how can you be so brutal to a baby? And only her fault is her gender? I mean, she's going through so much abuse and neglect. Why? Because she's a girl? That's the reason? It's so heartbreaking to hear this kind of stories.
अगर आप या कोई और जिसे आप जानते हैं जो घरेलू और डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस से गुजर रहे हैं, कृपया मैत्री से संपर्क करें। मैत्री की सेवाएं बिल्कुल मुफ्त और विश्वसनीय हैं। हमारी सेवाएं हिंदी, पंजाबी, मराठी, गुजराती और अन्य दक्षिण एशियाई भाषाओं में उपलब्ध हैं। You can call us Monday to Friday 9 to 3 p.m. on 188-862-4874. For after hours, leave voicemail in your language. You can also email us at maitri, maitri@maitri.org.
Women you interviewed from metropolitan cities, when their husbands and their family in-laws, they are seeing that they are powerful women, or they are not powerful. I don't know whether the right word to use. I mean, they are independent. They have
Right.
some their own minds, and they get threatened, and they try to beat them up. I think this is not only happening inside families. This is patriarchal nature of our society that
Right.
fosters the perception that women are less qualified, women are less competent than men.
Right.
And
Right.
when they see strong and intelligent women, they perceive them as problem, as
Right.
disruption to the social order. It's happening with all women from all socioeconomic background from all over the world. And I don't know how to break that mindset, how to, as I said, we have to do a lot of work. Your work is based on India, so I was asking about India. Do you think that sex selection abortion in India is fueled by patriarchy and gender discrimination? Only because, when we are seeing a case like Mithu's, her family was not poor class or uneducated class,
Right.
so we cannot blame sex selective abortion to poverty. I mean, yeah, some cases in village, rural area, probably people are scared that, oh, if I have girls, then I have to give dowry and a lot of responsibilities. My girl will not earn money for us when we are old. So probably financial worries were working. But in general, when we see all the classes, different classes, poor and rich and educated and uneducated, one common thing, I think, patriarchy and the selective abortion was fueled by patriarchy and gender discrimination. But you can describe it better. I think I want to know your opinion. Do you think sex selective abortion in India is fueled by only patriarchy and gender discrimination?
Absolutely. And it's sex selective. First of all, it's illegal, right? After 3 months, you can't do an abortion in India, and you can't do an ultrasound, right? So obviously those who do not have the money can't even afford to pay the doctors. But so the doctors can't write if it's a boy or girl, right, on the ultrasound. So these people, the wealthy and educated who don't want daughters, would give them money under the table. And there was signs they would use to show people if they're having a girl or boy. They would say, they put a plus sign on the paper if there's a boy, and like secret codes, or minus sign if there's a girl. So even there's like, they're giving girls a negative there's so much negative connotation associated with it. Or they say paint your room blue or pink. I also found, so because I told you I also did work in the US and Canada, I did have, in Canada especially, right outside the border of Vancouver, northern Canada, there is a clinic that provides early ultrasounds, and their target audience is Indians, because there's a huge Indian community in British Columbia. And I saw flyers. These flyers they give out in, like, the places of worship, or where in the Indian markets. This then, it was not just happening in India. This was shocking for me, that sex selective abortions were also happening in Canada among the Indian community, and people were making money off it. Like,
Mm.
they were, because the ads would be, have a boy or girl, but mostly pictures of boys, and they're really pushing the boys. And we can tell you as early as, well, I don't even remember how many weeks, we can give you the gender. We can let you know the gender of this the baby as early as so many weeks. And this is not Indian doctors. This was a Caucasian doctor that was doing this, an American doctor who was pushing gender selection on Indians in that community. So he was even putting, even if people were not thinking about it, he was putting it in their minds. And again, they are living in Canada. These were people who want no longer from a village, and they were being, and I had one woman tell me off camera that she was pressured into going and finding out the gender of a baby when she was just a couple, I don't know how many weeks. They do it very early in this place. And I don't know if she had an abortion. She didn't want to talk about it, but she was from a wealthy, educated family. So that, to me, not just in India, among the the more educated and the wealthy people, was also happening in Canada and in the US, where people were aware of these technologies. And then the other technology that's also happening, in which where people from India come all the way to the US, is where they do the selection even before the baby's born, right? So they'll say we want to have a son. So they will. I forgot. It's been a while, since I made this documentary. I forgot what the term is called, but they would implant only male embryos into the woman, so she'll only have a son. So they were taking science to the next level by ensuring that they only have sons by having male. So you can see how early the discrimination against girls and women. They're not even wanting to have daughters. They want to have one son. They can afford to have like 20 kids if they, these are all wealthy people. That technology is so expensive. They're coming all the way from India to the US for the technology, because only US is one of the few countries where this technology is available, where you can decide on the gender of the embryo and then have that implanted. So these are educated, wealthy people who are seeking this treatment, who that money they could spend on having daughters, or supporting organizations like Maitri or other or orphanages that provide a home for parents who cannot afford to keep their kids, and here they are spent. So this to me was really troubling and in a way heartbreaking.
Yes,
that
yes.
so desperate for sons, they'll go to this extent.
Yeah. So gender inequality is so ingrained in people's mind that they want to abort a girl even before she is born, and they, by all means, they want to have sons. And routine elimination of girls before their birth is no doubt the most extreme proof of women's undervaluation. That
Right,
goes
right,
all,
right.
yeah, that actually goes all well beyond all other forms of discrimination.
Right. And this is your own child that you and your wife are creating. And,
Yeah.
you have no value for that child that you and your wife created out of love. I mean, that to me is like horrific. And you had a mother you loved, and you had sisters, and you don't want your own daughter. I just don't understand it.
I was reading a science paper, and it was shown there that in India, boys are breastfed for longer than girls,
Right.
because breastfeeding makes women less fertile, and mothers looking to have another child, and as is often the case after a female birth, will discontinue breastfeeding after breastfeeding their daughters sooner, because
Right.
they want to get pregnant again for
Have a
son.
son. Yeah.
And as boys get longer duration of breastfeeding, which is documented to have important health implication in India, where drinking water is in rural area is often unsafe for infants relative to breast milk. So girls are facing oppression and neglect at every stage, even before they are born. So that is
Right.
very, very sad and frustrating. So let's talk about something hopeful and something
Right.
good.
Right.
Do you see any progress in the field of gender equality around you since you made Petals in the Dust? I know that time is very short, but still.
Right. Something great that came about it, that I saw after I made the film, so many people were involved in the film. And with the Walk for India's Missing Girls, and I would do a lot of fundraisers and speaking opportunities. Many women came forward. These were not in my film, felt very empowered and started organizations themselves. Like there was one woman in Canada, she was in my film, and then she started, and she had faced a lot of discrimination, but she started an organization to help and empower girls. Another woman she's not in my film, she's not Indian, but she was a big supporter of Petals in the Dust, and she runs non-profit for girls in India and Kerala who are from what we would call a scheduled caste. I know that Sonia and her sisters have become, on the board of directors, and they've been doing amazing work. And they met at the Walk for India's Missing Girls and at the Petals in the Dust screening. I saw a lot of empowerment and lots of collaborations come out of the film. A young girl in India who was in my film, she started a organization to empower other girls, and she got a whole bunch of actually her college mates, boys, to come together and do work among them. So I saw lots of, I saw a lot of awakening happening. I don't know in terms of whether I've seen less mentions in the media in India about sex-selective abortions and about there was a whole spate of sexual assaults happening after the Delhi rape. Despite that, but I think more people have been
More
talking
awareness.
about it. There's definitely more
Awareness.
yeah, more people speaking. But I in terms of patriarchy, I think if you're talking about hope and solutions, I think it really starts in the home. I think parents need to really work with their sons and daughters, to empower them, because I think the problem really is when you don't teach your own kids how to stand up for human rights, and especially in terms of patriarchy. For instance, my husband, he's a great cook. He cooks a lot. I always want to marry someone who would. I'm not very good at doing housework and cooking, and my husband does a lot of that. He's like, even when I was kids were babies, he would change their diapers. And I think that just comes from, I don't know, that maybe his parents were like that. But so my sons see that, and my sons have started cooking and baking and cleaning. They're going to take on a lot of the household chores. So I think when it's in the family and the father set an example and the mothers encourage it. And with my daughter, I also really empower her, and I like she's learning judo with one of my sons, and I tell her, like, you have to, first of all, you have to learn self-defense, and then secondly, you have to speak up when something is not right. You have to stand up for that and say what it is. So I think you start in the home with both the boys and girls. You treat them equally, and then that is where I think if every parent did that, if first of all,
Yeah. It
if
is our
they start,
responsibility. It is our
it is our
responsibility
responsibility.
to start gender identify biases, gender biases, and teach our kids about
Right.
gender
Because it's the next, yeah. Because it's the
equity.
next generation, right? If you
Yes,
continue
yes.
the cycle, if you continue that cycle in your house, and sometimes I know it's unfortunate, especially with some of the survivors of, domestic violence, your clients that maybe their kids were exposed to the discrimination and violence from their fathers. But I think those women, by taking the stand and leaving those oppressive patriarchal homes, I think for the kids, seeing a strong mother who stood
Mm.
up for her rights is also empowerment, right? Because my mother she tried, but did not take the violence that was meted out to her. She stood up for it. So I think talking about that and how we cannot be silent, and also that, especially when it's gender discrimination violence, you cannot be quiet about it. It's
Of
not.
course.
So I think that's important too. And the work that Maitri does is really powerful.
Yeah, I think although we are seeing promising instances, like we have more women in politics, science, technology, law enforcement, and other male-dominated fields, but progress towards gender equality is limited. And pace is slow. But at least we are seeing something. At least something is happening. Some people are talking about it. People are
Right,
trying
like
to
the
do something. So that's the
right.
hopeful part. And also, I think we need to create a culture where gender inequality can be openly discussed, and people at all levels should be proactively, modifying their daily behavior. They need to identify if they have inequality in their own household, also around us, so that we can, identify and address that and eliminate that finally. Until we stop denying inequality exists around us, it will be impossible to make any progress. So we have to acknowledge that yes, we have gender inequality, gender
Right.
abuse, oppression around us, and we have to do something to stop. So, Naina, last question. I know you are doing a lot of work in addressing and ending gender discrimination, but audience would love to hear from you about your work. You can, talk about how you are contributing in raising awareness recently, right now,
Sure.
even after making the film.
Right. So after so as I said, I made the film, and then I saw all this, amazing collaborations, and I used this film screenings to speak about it. But then I also started this social enterprise called the Expat Woman, and it
Hmm.
was initially to help immigrant women in the U.S. because I had a hard time adjusting to the U.S. And I think immigrant women do face a lot of discrimination, especially if they're women of color. Whether it's finding a job, getting funding for business. So my work has changed a little bit. One of the things I have addressed with the expat women, and my organization doesn't just have immigrants, we also have a lot of American women as well. One of the things that I was focusing on is getting more girls and women into tech and STEM, because I see a lot of gender disparity in the US, and I know it's across the world, but I live here where there's a big pay gap, gender pay gap. Men are still earning more than women, even here in Silicon Valley, which is supposed to be, right, the epicenter for technological advances, and it was one of the wealthiest places. So where we talk about how can we advocate for getting equal salaries, there's a lot of discrimination and harassment that still happen in companies. So my focus has been more on helping professional women deal with gender discrimination, but I also do what we call a hackathon once a year. It's an all women hackathon where women come together to work on projects that will help make lives of women easier. And some of the topics that they worked on have been on women's safety, on providing platforms for women who are facing gender discrimination and violence, helping women get into STEM, into tech jobs, get full pay. So that my work is kind of shifted from what I did with Petals in the Dust to now helping professional women, because I think even at that level, you might be very educated, but you still face discrimination, and especially women of color, women who have moved from other countries, see that there's still unfortunately a lot of the jobs and the funding goes to white men, and then next to maybe white women. So trying to change that and give women again a voice to be empowered and speak up, and also encourage their daughters to get into tech heavy careers, so we can have more women in engineering and science, which right now are very male dominated.
Thank you, Nyna, for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. I think we are moving too slowly in closing gender gaps, despite a global realization that gender equity is not only a fundamental human right, but a necessary foundation for a peaceful and prosperous, sustainable world. But I'm sure today's discussion will help many of us or many listeners out there to see things differently and to identify gender inequality and biases in our own lives and try to eliminate that. Then only we will be able to create a just and safe world for all genders, for all of us. So with that hope and determination, we are ending our show today. Keep listening to our podcast, and if you haven't already, then please like, comment, and share. Listeners, we need your support to gain visibility. Find all the episodes of our podcast Between Friends, Maitri, on SoundCloud, Apple, Google, Spotify, and other podcast apps. I'm your host, Nandini Ray, looking forward to bring more meaningful discussions for you. Till then, stay safe and stay happy. Thank you for listening.
This show is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as legal advice. Always consult an attorney for legal advice. Views expressed by guests of the radio show are individual opinions and not endorsed by Maitri.